Hello and welcome back. So now let's discuss and understand the Deno's architecture. So we'll be talking a bit about how Deno works under the hood. So the building blocks of Deno is Rust, Tokyo and V8 engine. So if you go through this diagram, you will understand it very easily. So this is Rust, right? Which is the backend programming language. This is Tokyo, which basically is used for asynchronous input and output, that is asynchronous IO, right? Basically for thread pooling services. Then comes the Rusty V8, which allows Deno to communicate with the V8 engine and do whatever stuff it wants to do with JavaScript and TypeScript, right? So V8 engine is basically on the browser, right? And Rusty V8 allows you to communicate with it and you write your backend code at Rust, right? Now, we have got a TypeScript frontend, but just for mentioning, it has also got a JavaScript frontend. But why I'm saying this has got a TypeScript frontend is because Deno takes the V8 engine and it gives it a JavaScript file, right? So even if you write a JavaScript file, it will directly run it on the V8 engine using Rusty V8, right? And if you give it a TypeScript file, it has a inbuilt compiler into it, which compiles the TypeScript into JavaScript and then feeds it into the V8 engine. And if you directly give a JavaScript file, it will leave that compilation stage and directly feed it inside the V8 engine for the rendering part, right? Now, Rusty V8 is a very important component because Deno is written in Rust and it uses Rusty V8 in order to communicate with the V8 engine. So that's why the Rusty or the Rust backend and the V8 engine gets communicated using this API, right? Then comes the Rust backend, right? And for people who don't know what is Rust is a programming language which has been developed by Mozilla. It's a fantastically developed programming language, has got excellent performance when compared with C++, right? And it has been being used in enterprise quality apps and is gaining traction. As of now, if you talk to any developer or go to Stack Overflow, what is the most famous language? Rust is the most famous language as of now, right? So currently the backend is the privileged side. When I say privileged side, that means because Rust is used to write Deno's core API and core architecture, so it has got that privilege to access everything, but that privilege is not given to the JavaScript or the TypeScript part, right? It needs permission, it needs security, right? So that we'll talk about at a later part, right? If you pass that security or the permission check, you are allowed to access using TypeScript or JavaScript. For now, we'll leave it. We have got a dedicated video on that, right? So we'll talk about asynchronous IO. Now, if we want to run multiple things at the same time, we will need asynchronous IO, right? And we'll be needing event loops. Here comes the Tokyo library. So basically, if you go to the diagram, you will see Tokyo sitting here, right? Now, what does Tokyo does is only used for thread pooling services and parallel programming, parallel execution of stuffs using asynchronous IO, right? So the Tokyo library is a Rust library that allows us to use thread pools and workers, and it allows multiple tasks to be executed at once, right? And that's the beauty of Tokyo, right? So anytime we run a code that is not merely JavaScript, anything from Deno docs, that means from the Rusty background, it communicates and uses Tokyo at the backend because it is executed over a Tokyo thread, right? Now, let's understand the summary of the Deno architecture. So the building blocks of Deno is Rust, Tokyo, and V8, right? On the front, we write JavaScript and TypeScript, and Deno automatically compiles the TypeScript to JavaScript that is fed into the V8 engine using the Rusty V8, which is written in Rust, right? Deno's backend is written in Rust, but just for your information's sake, Ryan Dahl previously considered using Go, but just because of some memory problems and other problems, it did not go ahead with Go and then considered using Rust, right? And that was a wonderful choice. Tokyo allows Deno to use thread pools, right? And workers in order to do parallel stuffs. And package management in Deno has been decentralized. This as of now, we will not discuss at a very deep depth level. We'll discuss this at a later stage when we talk about modules and toolings, right? So this is how the architecture of Deno is arranged. And this is just a generic introduction to how Deno works under the hood. So see you in the next video now.